Ladies and gentlemen, survivors of Auschwitz, I would like to thank the International Auschwitz Committee for the invitation to speak to you here today. In my estimation, an invitation of this kind is still not something that can be taken for granted. It would be fitting for us Germans to remain silent in the face of what was the greatest crime in the history of mankind. Words by the government leaders are inadequate when confronted with the absolute immortality and senselessness of the murder of millions. We look for rational understanding of something that is beyond human comprehension. We seek definitive answers, but in vain. What is left is the testimony of those few who survived and their descendants. What is left also is the certainty that these extermination camps were a manifestation of absolute evil. What is left are the remains of the sites of these murders and the historical record. Evil is not a political or scientific category. But after Auschwitz, who could doubt that it exists and that it manifested itself in a hate-driven genocide carried out by the Nazi regime? However, noting that this fact does not permit us to circumvent our responsibility by blaming everything on the demonic Hitler. The evil manifested in the Nazi ideology was not without its persecutors. There was a tradition behind the rise of this brutal ideology and the accompanying loss of moral inhibition. Above all, it needs to be said that the Nazi ideology was something that people supported at the time and that they took part in putting into effect. Now, 60 years after the liberation of Auschwitz by the Red Army, I stand before you as the deaths of those who were murdered and for the fact that you, the survivors, were forced to go through the hell of a concentration camp. We bear this burden with sadness, but also with a serious sense of responsibility. Millions of men, women, and children were gassed, starved, or shot by German SS troops and their helpers. Never before had there been a worse breakdown of thousands of years of European culture and civilization. After the war, it took some time before the full extent of this breakdown was realized. We are aware of it, but I doubt that we will ever be able to understand it. The past cannot be overcome. It is the part, but it is traces, and above all, the lessons to be learned from it extend to the present. It is the duty of all Democrats to provide a strong response to neo-Nazi incitement and reoccurring attempts on their part to play down the importance of the crimes perpetrated by the Nazi regime. For the enemies of the democracy and the tolerance, there will be no tolerance. Nonetheless, this remembrance is part of our national identity. Remembrance of the Nazi era and its crimes is a moral obligation. We owe it to the victims. We owe it to the survivors and their families, and we owe it to ourselves. It is true, the temptation to forget is very great, but we will not succumb to this temptation. Together with you, I bow my head before the victims of the death camps, even if for one day the names of the victims should fade into the memory of mankind. Their face will not be forgotten. They will remain in the heart of history. Thank you for allowing me here today for this day of remembrance.